Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. So, after one of the wildest weeks in political history, we have delayed the show multiple times, but finally, things have calmed down for 5 minutes. Nobody got shot, no presidents have resigned. And so finally, able to talk about westerns. I wanted to go ahead and mix in some of my favorite movies and shows when I get to talk with some of my guests here. And westerns are one of my favorite genres. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is probably my favorite western. So coming on to talk about that today with me is Wade Stotts of The Wade Show. Thanks for joining me, man.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, glad to, again, no major tumultuous political upheavals to
Yeah,
throw us off this
we've
week.
already talked about those before. Yeah, we've
Right.
done our shows. Yeah.
Now that everyone knows the Constitution is dead, you
Yeah.
can talk about the Man that shot Liberty Valance,
Oh, yeah.
which will be quite relevant actually to the topic of this movie. But I had the pleasure of meeting Wade over at the NatCon 4 in Washington D.C. That conference. So that was great. If you're not checking out his work, of course, you should absolutely be doing so. Wade, we're going to get into the movie specifically, but for me, westerns are part of my family history. My maternal grandfather was a huge western fan, one of those guys who just fell asleep, in the easy chair every afternoon watching westerns. Just shelves of Louis L'Amour books. My father watches tons of westerns. Is also a western aficionado when it comes to history. He can recite every fact you've ever forgotten about the Wild West. Where does your love of westerns come from?
Yeah, I didn't really grow up watching westerns, with one possible exception. My great aunt, whenever I'd go stay with her, she had just a handful of VHSs, and one of them was Three Amigos. And I guess you could count that as, it's sort of a take on Magnificent Seven anyway. But what got me into westerns as an adult was when I had my first son. I decided that I was, wanted to figure out what I was going to show him, what kind of movies and shows. And I knew that, I grew up on like SpongeBob and whatever was on, going on TV at that point. But I just wanted to give them at least, a little bit more of the like old movies that I knew my parents grew up on, and I knew that they'd enjoyed. So yeah, my wife and I, for holidays, we would just trade back and forth DVDs. So we would buy each other for Christmas. She would buy me three, and I'd buy her three, and those would be, at least some of the gifts that we'd give each other, and then watch them and get excited about showing to our kids. And yeah, now I have three sons, and so westerns are already a pretty big part of our entertainment diet, which has been a lot of fun. So I came to it as an adult, and I still feel in some ways like I'm in the shallow end, but it's fun over here in the shallow end.
Absolutely. Well, you're building a fantastic legacy to be sure when it comes. It's slightly better than the SpongeBob, so
Yeah, sure.
that's a
Yeah.
good direction. All right,
Yeah.
guys. Well, we're gonna go ahead and dive into The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, but before we do, let's hear from today's sponsor. Hey guys, I need to tell you about today's sponsor, Birch Gold. If you haven't been following the news, a massive hit in the US dollar just came in June when Saudi Arabia didn't renew its 50-year petrodollar deal with the US. Since 1974, Saudi Arabia has sold oil solely in US dollars, and that's been a huge boon to our global economic dominance. Now they want options other than US dollars. So you have to ask yourself, if there's less demand for the dollar, then what happens to the dollar? Look, it's reasons like this that Americans turn to Birch Gold Group. For over 20 years, Birch Gold has helped tens of thousands of Americans protect their savings by converting an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. To learn more, text the word Auron to 989898 and claim your free no obligation kit on gold. That's Auron to the number 989898. Birch Gold has earned trust with their education first approach, their thousands of happy customers, and their countless 5-star reviews. So protect your savings with gold before the dollar plunges any further. Text Auron to 989898 today. So the movie, for people who are not aware, is a John Ford classic. This guy who did a lot of movies in the Western genre and outside of it. He did The Searchers, but he also did things like Grapes of Wrath, those kind of movies. and it's got some of the great actors when it comes to, well, any movie, but particularly westerns. Of course, you've got John Wayne, you have Jimmy Stewart, you have Lee Marvin as the villain, doing a great job there. Uh, I have always been somebody who came down more in the John Wayne camp. There's kind of a division between, do you like your gritty westerns, your Clint Eastwood, your spaghetti western type, or are you more of a John Wayne guy? Which sometimes he can do more serious ones, like True Grit is a little more serious, but he also does a lot more of the hokier ones. What do you tend to prefer in your westerns?
I'm totally on your side on this debate. I think that the like gritty westerns, uh, for as much value as they have, and I've enjoyed those as well. I think John Wayne at a certain level knew how to pick projects based on. I think there was a lot more humanity in his projects. I think, and it showed the sort of you can call it sentimental or a sentimentalist view of the West. Though this movie in particular is not a sentimentalist kind of movie. But yeah, I totally prefer the John Wayne ones, the hero riding in, and all the flaws are there, and you see the flaws and you see everything else. But yeah, the pre deconstructed westerns are my favorite still.
Yeah, just heading in here, obviously, we will be spoiling a movie that's well over like 50 years old at this point. So, run for the hills, I guess,
No,
if
yeah.
you're unfamiliar. But this is your one and only chance to bail out. So there's a couple themes that work their way through pretty much all westerns. Many people have compared the comic book genre to the western in that it's just kind of the mode in which all movies were being made at the time. There is a little bit of truth to that, but I think it's a little overwrought, particularly because I think westerns dealt with things a lot better. That that they really had much better ability to go ahead and search out certain parts of human nature. But one theme that certainly resonates throughout a lot of westerns is the approach of civilization. What it is to tame a frontier, what it is to conquer that, and then the approach of law and order, the approach of the government, the different things that are going to go ahead and make the West and tame it into a kind of a more modern city, something that's closer to our normal society. That's certainly something that's at the heart of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Can you explain a little bit about the dynamic between Jimmy Stewart's character and John Wayne's character?
Yeah. So Jimmy Stewart's character, Ransom Stoddard, is this lawyer fresh out of law school. But we don't see him at first that way. What we see him at first is this senator returning to the small town of Shinbone. And so he's coming in on a train. He meets a guy who we find out used to be the marshal of the town. And so what we see him is this guy who is high up politically. The whole town rushes to see him. And then we find out why is he there? Why is this senator in the middle of this small town? He's there to go to a funeral, and he tells the newspaper man that, and he says, "Who died?" And so you've got this. And what we find out is that it's Tom Donovan who died, which is John Wayne's character. But most of the movie, we see Rance as this lawyer fresh out of law school, a lot of high ideals in his mind. He's got bags full of law books that he's coming in on a stagecoach with. And then we see John Wayne, on the other hand, who has lived here for a long time and was at some level a huge part of keeping this town safe. So Tom Donovan, he doesn't have any kind of official title there. The guy who Andy Devine is the sheriff, and if you know him from any of his other movies, he's always the comic relief, the kind of bumbling character. And so we've got Tom Donovan, this guy who is violent and a little scary, and but also is relaxed and easy to be around. And over against that is the sort of, I stand with high ideals guy, the guy who thinks of government in terms of pieces of paper, books. There's a great scene in one where where Ransom is washing dishes and reading a book, and Liberty Valance is the violent sort of villain character in this movie. And he's looking at he's washing dishes, reading a book, Ransom is, and he sees a spot and he has somebody read it, and he says, "Look, I've got Liberty Valance right where I want him." So he's looking at this book and he thinks, okay, now this is where I've got him. And then what John Wayne, on the other hand, in his conversations about Liberty Valance, says that if you're going to stand up to Liberty Valance, you're going to need a gun, and you're going to have to learn how to use one of these. And one of the earliest scenes, one of the first scenes we see between Tom and Ransom, is this great moment where so Tom tells Ransom, "You're going to need a gun," and then Ransom says, he said, what does he say? He says, you're telling me exactly what Liberty Valance told me. You're telling me the bad guy told me. And so at the beginning, at least, Ransom can't tell the difference between Tom and this villain, this obvious villain. And so that's at least the beginning dynamic, is this this lawyer out of law school and this guy who has been a part of settling this town, and their conflict, and eventually erupts in a bunch of interesting ways, which we'll get to.
Absolutely. So, as you said, he comes into town on this stagecoach, and they're going to the town of Shinbone. Shinbone is currently a territory, but Valance really represents the interests of the ranchers. The ranchers want to keep this area open range so that they can have free feed for their for their cattle, this kind of thing. And he is there to enforce their will. He's got a small gang that he rides with, and on top of his criminal mischief, he also is kind of represents this idea of keeping the area wild, right? He doesn't want statehood. He doesn't want law and order to come in and enforce the fences and protect the land and the ownership of these different properties. Wants things to stay the same. So he and Tom Donovan have a similar understanding of kind of where they are best, right? This is their, whether, even though one is good and one is evil, they both operate best in this kind of wild scenario. But Ransom comes in, and the first thing that happens to him, the way that he's introduced, like you said before, we get the flashback at the beginning where he's a senator, so we already kind of know, Tom's gonna die, Ransom's gonna end up with the girl. We already know all these things. There's no tension in that. The woman that Tom and Ransom are going to be fighting over is Haley, I believe is the character's name. I have the actress's
Hallie. Vera Miles.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so we already know how that's going to play out. But when he comes into town, he's jumped by his stagecoaches, is pulled over by Liberty Valance and his gang. And I always forget, that he keeps throwing dude in there. It's like, hey, dude, stand and deliver, dude. Forgetting that that's an insult, as opposed to like something Ninja Turtles. And so they go ahead and pull over the stagecoach, and we see right away that Liberty Valance is a man of Ransom is a man of high ideals, because he tells Liberty Valance, hey, you can't steal this stuff. There's a brooch or something that the woman in the stagecoach with them, it came from her husband or her dead husband or something like that, and she doesn't want to give it up. And so Ransom attempts to defend her and gets beaten within an inch of his life. And that's how he's brought into town. Is he is really destroyed by this idea that violence would be an option. He's willing to put himself between this woman and the highwayman, but he just completely is unable to stop him. And this is really the position he finds himself in immediately, because he's immediately required to go ahead and come into town. And he's not just recuperating there. He needs Tom Donovan's kind of protection in this moment. And he also ends up washing dishes and waiting tables. So he's immediately put in kind of this effeminate role. So he's already playing kind of the weak man in this society.
Right. And there's a moment with the scene at the stagecoach. I listened to a commentary where Lee Marvin was talking about the scene and how it was playing out. And Jimmy Stewart, every time he got to the point where he was supposed to yell at Liberty Valance, every time he was supposed to talk him down, he couldn't get the words out. And he just, for some reason, would flub it every time, or just didn't have the confidence in him. And John Ford, the director, cut everybody, walked straight up to Jimmy Stewart and said, "You are not a coward." And so even at the beginning, exactly what you said, he's willing to put himself in the middle of this, but he doesn't realize at a basic level what it's going to take to win this interaction. He thinks he can quote sort of out of his law books the way that he learned in law school.
And we see this dynamic, like you said, play out then in the dining scene where
Yeah.
Liberty Valance walks in. He recognizes that you have Ransom there waiting tables. He goes ahead and trips Ransom. Ransom knows something needs to be done. He knows he's losing face, but he doesn't know how to actually interact with this. Tom Donovan comes in and demands in a pretty great scene that he pick up the steak, and Liberty Valance tries to get one of his henchmen to pick it up. He's like, "No, you, Valance, you do it." He's obviously bringing things to a head, and this just terrifies. Well, it shouldn't say terrifies. It horrifies Ransom because he's like, "You guys are going to murder each other over this steak. Like, I can't believe that you guys were willing to go into a gunfight over this steak." He still doesn't
Yeah.
understand that there at no point is fair play or logic in the way that he understands it going to enter into the decisions that are being made in this moment.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that scene, like you said, is a really great one, just even from like a filmmaking perspective. So if you're a movie nerd, being able to follow all the blocking in there is just brilliant. But it's one of those scenes that you could watch on mute and totally understand every piece of the character
That's
dynamics,
right.
because
Yeah.
who's standing where and where in the frame they are. There really aren't that many shots in that one, but it's like a little play where you're able to again see every little character dynamic, and that's what's so great about. I heard this in a review. I read this in a review of this movie at the time. Somebody said that the Western is the most political of the genres because it takes abstract political concepts and puts them in concrete actions. And that's the strength of movies. Is the a lot of the times in movies they try to be like plays in the sense that they will put a lot of the ideas right up front in people's dialogue. But this at this in this movie, it shows how concrete those things are. How all the ideas don't have to be just in the schoolroom scene. So a lot of times the schoolroom scene ideas or the high ideas that Ransom says are in dialogue, but in reality, if you're watching the whole movie on mute, you know exactly what's going on and what the real political realities are in Shinbone at this time.
Well, I think the worst crime in the entire movie is probably the fact that every one of these guys in the diner wants their steak burned as early as
Yeah.
possible. I'm just sitting there like, oh
Yeah.
my God, why?
Yeah.
No.
Burn me a big one, I think
Yeah,
is what
yeah.
John Wayne says. Oh,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
Every one of them, has
Yeah.
the same terrible order. It's, just you can understand why everyone is so angry all the time.
Yeah. But
All
there's
right.
and in within that same scene, do you have something you're going to do?
No, good.
Within that same scene, that's the scene where he's reading out of the law book and says, "I've got Liberty Valance right where I want him." So this is
Hmm.
before Valance walks in, and he hands the book over to Hallie, who then says she can't read,
Right.
and she says, "Oh, do you think you could teach me?" And he said, "Oh, I'll teach you. It'll be great." And then some after they've had the conversation about whether they can read or, "Oh, can I teach you how to read?" Tom walks in. John Wayne's character walks in and he sees up on the wall a sign that says Ransom Stoddard, attorney at law. And he reads it out loud and he turns to Ransom and starts having a conversation about, like, if you put that up, you're just going to get it shot down by Liberty Valance. But the movie doesn't jump up and down on it. But at that moment, you've got one guy who can read and thinks that's exactly what everybody needs here in this town is I'll start a school. And then you've got another guy who can read who walks in. You see immediately that he reads. Nobody goes, "Oh, Tom, you can read. Wow, wow, wow." It's just he says it, and then they start the conversation again about that dynamic between, yeah, you can put that sign up, sure, go ahead, but you're going to get it shot down, and it's not going to be pretty for you.
Yeah, it's important that Tom is not an idiot, right? Tom is
Right.
not just a brute. This is
Mhm.
a guy who has earned the respect of his community through his heroism, through his courage, through his being a man of action. But he is not completely without letters as well. He may not
Right.
be as advanced at Ransom in these different areas, but they are operating on a level that is more equal in a playing field that is more equal than many other movies would necessarily portray that stark difference. And
Right.
I definitely want to get into the classroom because, like you said, this is also where we understand. We kind of know from the beginning that Haley is John Wayne's girl. Like everybody knows, eventually John Wayne's going to make his move. He's always He brings her a cactus bloom, which is something that at the beginning of the movie she wants to go see the cactus blooms, and that's how they end up at his house when she's remembering about him. And so she's obviously kind of something that he's got his eye on. Everybody knows eventually that they're going to end up together. But the beginning of this learning, the beginning of learning to read is also the beginning of Jimmy Stewart being involved in basically this love triangle of possibly being someone who could win away what was supposed to be inevitably the prize of the man who was taming the West.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and the cactus blossom thing is huge there because he brings her the cactus blossom, and then after Tom leaves, they plant the cactus blossom outside, and there's a scene between Ransom and Hallie. I think we're saying it differently, but I don't really know which one it is. But they're looking at it, and she says, "Ransom, isn't that the prettiest thing you've ever seen? This cactus rose." And then he says, "Well, yeah, it's pretty, but you ever seen a real rose? That we got real roses back east." And so again, that's this obviously an image for what is for who, and that gets picked up later. This cactus blossom is an image for what John Wayne's character is in this movie.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get to the, like I said, the schoolroom scene, because I think that's the next important thing to talk about. But before we do, let's go ahead and hear from Job Stacking. Hey, guys, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Job Stacking. More paychecks, less hustle, working from home. That's what Job Stacking is all about. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then consider joining the Job Stacking Mentorship Program. The program is designed by Ralph Haltza, the creator of Job Stacking, to help you successfully implement a strategy that will allow you to collect multiple paychecks from different jobs without burning out or getting caught by employers. Job stacking has already helped many people double or even triple their incomes. Luke Hill, a financial analyst living in the UK, has used job stacking to stack 3 different jobs and went from making $5K a month to $15K a month. But job stacking isn't just about increasing incomes. It's also about helping our guys gain more independence by no longer being a slave to debt or a single employer who hates their values. Andrew Gustafsson, a credit analyst from Australia, is now stacking 4 salaries, which he has used to pay off his personal and student debt and buy a home for his family. If you don't currently have a remote job, no worries. The program is also designed to help you land remote jobs so that you can go ahead and get started. So if you want to double your income and stop relying on a single paycheck from a woke employer, go to jobstacking.com/start now. That's jobstacking.com/start now and book a call with Rolf today. All right, so the schoolhouse is a big deal in this movie because, like I said, a lot of this is about the advance of civilization. We have these different hints that the time of John Wayne is probably coming to an end and the time of Ransom is approaching, but Ransom is unable to do what he needs to do. He's not able to really protect himself, maintain himself. Civilization has not arrived substantially enough for a man like Ransom to flourish. And so it's still John Wayne who is watching over him. And this is one of the things that we see at the end of the diner scene or the restaurant scene is Ransom gets very angry over the fact that John Wayne had to stand up for him. He says, "Nobody fights my battles," right? He's very, again, he knows he should have the courage. He knows what is going on, that he's being belittled, that some kind of check needs to occur on Liberty Valance, but he can't appeal to the sheriff because the sheriff is a coward. Like you said, he's the comic relief. He slinks away every time Liberty Valance is in town, and so he has to rely on unofficial sources, which it says, I think, something important about our society because we are, as civilized people, so used to being able to go to institutions, going to government agents, going to some third party intermediary to take care of our problems. We are very not used to asking our neighbor, to expecting some kind of direct reciprocal protector protectee relationship, right? With that level of dependency that really builds a tight knit community is in many ways an anathema to us. And so many of us, when forced into those scenarios where you have to ask a family member for a loan or someone would have to defend you, you would have the same feeling. Like, we are civilized people. We should be able to just go to a third party. Of course, we don't need some random individual who we are now beholden to. But that indignity of Ransom in those moments where there is no law and order, there is no third party. It's simply him and Valance, and Tom is really the only thing standing between him and that violence, that wild violence that the West represents. That's always something that's a huge tension for him.
Yeah, and the point about community is a big one, because in this movie in particular, it's the focus is so small on these handful of characters, because that's where at least the action of the movie is. But you once in a while get little shots of the town and how they function, and the way, and this is a community that's been established, built, and has places that they go, that has people who show up to the restaurant and say, oh, it's going to be the usual. And that's what everybody there is trying to preserve at some level. But there's still at some level a desire for whatever's next. Everybody knows that they're at a decision point between, yes, is this going to be a state? Is this going to be a territory? And yeah, Valance does represent that. What's fascinating to me, though, with this movie in particular, we talked about John Ford being the guy who did The Searchers. He did She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, The Quiet Man, some big movies with big set pieces. This is a movie that was only shot on a lot. And I think one location, I think John Wayne's house was out at a ranch on location. But you don't get Monument Valley in this movie. You don't get those kind of iconic shots from Stagecoach, same kind of thing. But what you do get is this character element that's in all of these other John Wayne Westerns and all these other John Ford Westerns, put right up to the front. And so a lot of folks don't realize, because this is in black and white, that this came out before The Searchers, or it came out after The Searchers. People think it was before because it's black and white. But the black and white choice was on purpose, as was the decision to shoot in a small space. And it's because John Ford saw that this was a character story, and he just put it right up front. He and really shows off again that John Ford is not this sort of pure spectacle director, but can focus in and understand the human dynamics of a small group of people, where again, those decisions about where the country's going, or where this territory is going, are being made.
So Ransom Stoddard, Jimmy Stewart's character, decides to go ahead and start this schoolhouse, which is attached to the restaurant, and he's there going through the ABCs. He's got many people, not just Hallie or Haley or however we're supposed to say it, but whatever consensus we come to. But he's also got most notably all of the minority or immigrant members in the schoolhouse, right? It's mostly the two
the Swedish couple,
restaurant owners, and then you have Pompey, which is kind of John Stewart's manservant. Though they do have that moment later on where he comes in to drink in the bar, and the guy tries to tell him, "You're a black guy, you can't come in the bar," and John Wayne gets very angry and says he drinks here if he wants to. And then the immigrant children that are there, and so there's all these different groups from kind of the outside of the community that are there, and they're learning again to read and write, but also very importantly, he goes ahead and includes civics in the organization, in the lesson plan, because obviously we're also working in the theme of what the United States is and what civilization looks like. And so it's the Constitution says that all men are equal, and the government does what we say it does. It's very much the civics education is about the same, I guess, is the the answer I'm looking for here.
Yeah. Well, and you said a small correction. You said it was connected to the restaurant. The schoolhouse is connected to the law office.
Oh, that's right.
Which is also the newspaper office.
Newspaper office. I should have mentioned the newspaper guy by now.
Newspaper guy. Yeah, we'll definitely delve into his character because he's a fascinating piece as well. But he is also a high-minded guy. And at one point, we'll talk about this, his sort of one of his final scenes later. But the like lawyer and the journalist are in this room, and then off to the side is the schoolhouse, and he takes the newspaper in and says, this is one of the best teaching aids around, an honest newspaper. And so he goes in, and this article that was written in the room next door is about how we have to fight for statehood now. It's going to be, and all these ranchers who want it to remain a territory, they're going to destroy our, they're going to destroy any hope we have to maintain this town. And this may be rushing the school scene, but when John Wayne comes in, he comes in into the middle of his scene, and he tells Pompey to get back to working on the room he's building onto his house. And he basically breaks up the classroom, saying Liberty Valance, he's on the move again. He's killed a couple of ranchers. We know that he's headed here as well. And what he says to the newspaper man, he says, you've written some pretty words, and and you, Ransom, you read them well. But if you print that, this town gets burned down. And so again, we have the idealist, we have the idealists, I guess in this case, versus a guy who says, don't print that. And he agrees with it. He says, he not only can he read it, he also understands it and agrees with the arguments, because he's one that's advocating for statehood later in the movie. But he does tell them, yeah, don't do that right now. There's still a big, scary monster that needs to be killed first.
And it's really important that he, like you said, he's sympathetic to their arguments, but because he's the one who has to do the violence, because he's the one who will actually pay the price, he also understands the realities of how you could not implement that in a way that these guys who are constantly talking about their lofty ideals have no ability to do. And that, again, that's another big part of a big theme of this is, yes, Ransom might represent something critical, some critical step in civilization, but he cannot do this on his own. The thing I like about John Wayne, he can read, he does understand these arguments, he is on the side. He's never the heel. He's never the oaf. He's never this guy who's just too backwards to understand what's going on, or is fundamentally opposed even to something that will make his role in society somewhat obsolete. He just recognizes the reality on the ground. He just recognizes, as the guy who would have to get the job done, that this is simply something that has to have its time come. And he is constantly warning these guys that you can't rush into this. You can't just go ahead and implement these ideas. You have to have a practical way. You have to deal with the aspect of violence. You have to recognize those realities, quoting laws to these guys, quoting arguments, reading them newspaper articles is not going to do anything. And again, hopefully everyone can grasp the fact that this is very relevant in today's society.
Yeah. And it's also important to note that Jimmy Stewart, the Jimmy Stewart character, is also not the heel. Right. He's also not just a pure, like, we look down on him as this poor, pathetic guy, maybe an idealist, but he's weak. He's a coward. He's not a coward. The first scene we see him in, he's not acting like a coward. He's just ill-equipped and naive. And that's something, again, we see growth in that in the next scene. But there's a on the board behind them as they're teaching. He has written, education is the foundation of law and order. And so what he's doing here is he thinks that this is what we need to do to create what we want. What we want is this town to stay preserved. We want these people to grow up with some sense of love for what's going on. We want these people to be safe. We want women and children to be able to walk in the streets. And then by the end of that scene, after the school house is empty early, and it's just Hallie and Ransom. Ransom walks over and erases that off the board, and looks down and says to Hallie that Tom is right in this whole situation, and he recognizes that, and that pushes pretty heavily into that next scene.
So is it him training with the gun is the next scene, or
is
it the election is the next scene? Okay, so so the next scene is basically it's revealed to Tom that Ransom has been learning how to use a gun. The newspaper man had given him the gun so that he could defend himself at some point. He's been sneaking out to train on it, and so they go out, and he ends up at Tom's house. I forget exactly how. I think he he just grabs his wagon or something. I think.
Tom says, "Come over to my place." That's where we're shooting. Yeah,
right. And so he's trying to just explain to Ransom how woefully equipped he is for this battle. Like learning how to pull a trigger is not sufficient. So they go through some of the mechanisms of shooting the gun. And this is also where he goes ahead and reasserts his ownership over Hallie. He says, this is my girl. Want to make it clear to you because, she seemed really worried about you when she found out that you might be with a gun and might be in danger.
Yeah.
And so I just want to make it clear that, you need to give me a wide berth here. This is not your territory. And he also has him set up the paint cans to go ahead and do some target practice, but he starts shooting the paint cans as Ransom sets them up and just douses him in paint, just to make it very clear that, hey, you're not ready for this. But like you said, Ransom shows some steel and immediately turns around and knocks John Wayne on his butt, with a punch.
Right.
And John Wayne seems to give him a begrudging respect for that. This guy is not a warrior, but he has a fighting spirit. He has honor. He is not willing to just take that insult.
Right.
And when he does try to fight back, he does so admirably.
Yeah. And how he shows, hey, Hallie's my girl, how he does that is he points to the room he's building on.
Right.
He's building on a room to his house next to, so that she can, and that's something that he's been saying for a long time. I'm building a room on my house so that when we get married, she's going to have a place. I'm building her a porch, and it's going to be her little spot. And then in that shooting scene where he shoots the paint cans off, he says, I don't like tricks either. So John Wayne says, I don't like tricks either, but tricks are what you're going to get with Liberty Valance. You're not going to get a guy who plays fair. You're not going to get a guy who, walks his paces and draws. It's going to be ugly and it's going to be tricky. And why that punch is significant is that John Wayne wasn't expecting it. So after Ransom gets tricked, he punches back and then push. Yeah, I'll maybe save this, but yeah, it does push into the next scene and why those character dynamics work the way they do after that. So this is the midpoint. If you're a screenwriting guru, this is the midpoint, is the punch. So that's significant. That's a big turn in what's going to happen. And the rest of the movie makes a little bit more sense. The relationship between those two characters make a little bit more sense after Jimmy Stewart socks John Wayne, and John Wayne kind of smiles a little bit about it.
So the next scene we have, I believe, is the election, right? They shut down. Jimmy Stewart's character says we have to shut down the bar, which makes everybody very angry that they're not allowed to drink during the election. But we see everyone coming in. The Swedish immigrant gentleman is very excited about the fact that he has his citizenship papers, and the wife is crying because she's so proud that he's going to go participate in the election. This is also where we see the journalist really become an important character. He is, I love it because it's the perfect portrayal of a journalist. He's constantly talking about the importance of news, but he never wants to be involved in anything. He's constantly drunk and does a lot of monologuing to his whiskey jug all the time in there. And so they come in. Ransom has to run the meeting because he's the lawyer. He's the only one who knows, I guess, Robert's Rules of Order or whatever.
Yeah.
And
but Tom is the one who hands it over.
Right.
So
right.
Tom calls it to order, and he says, I Ransom Stoddard to come up here and lead this thing.
To chair this thing. Right. And the first thing that Ransom does is say, hey, I nominate Tom to be one. They need 2 delegates, right? And I nominate Tom to be one of these delegates. He's obviously the guy everybody respects. He's obviously the leader of the community. This should be who goes out there. But Tom immediately declines it because he says, I've got personal business. And by that, he very clearly means I'm going to go get married. Like I am planning a life with this woman who I've been trying to woo this whole time. I'm finally going to pull the trigger. Everyone's been asking me, when is this going to happen? The newspaper man, when he was flirting with her, is like, when can I print the wedding announcement? And so he's saying, I can't go to this delegation. This can't be my life. I have to go ahead and finally make good on this woman that I've been, courting, but I'm finally going to go ahead and ask her to marry me. And so Ransom is put up, but also this is where Liberty Valance comes in, and Valance comes in with a couple of his guys. He's only ever got 2 gang members. It feels like at any time if the town was just like, no, he would lose. Right, like I understand he's a good gunfighter, but it's literally just like 3 on 50 at any moment.
Yeah, well, and later on we do see that happen, but it's only after a significant event happens.
Right,
It
right,
happens
right.
to be the title of the movie. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so the gang members come in with him, and it's pointed out many times that he is not south. He's not from south of the picket line, which I guess is the delineation of people who could vote inside the territory. So he should not be able to make any. He should not be a delegate, much less be able to vote, much less become a delegate. But he has his own goons kind of put him up for this. And then the last person, they want someone else that's not him, and so they go ahead and put the newspaper guy, and the newspaper guy is just absolutely flabbergasted.
Yeah.
He hates it. No, of course I don't want to be involved in this.
Yeah.
I control the politicians.
Yeah.
I
I
paid
build them
them.
up, I
Right.
tear them down. Right. Yeah.
The self-important journalist, the
Yep.
omnipotent journalist. It's a beautiful depiction of sadly what they're right. Alcoholics who are on a power trip is pretty much the perfect way to describe a journalist.
Yeah.
And so they put him up, and in the first act where the whole town really revolts against Liberty Valance, even though he threatens them directly, he says, "Don't any of you, you're all strong now, you're all brave now, voting, but at some point you'll be alone. And so whenever you make that vote, don't be foolish. Recognize that you're going to pay the price for this." And still, despite all of that, the entire town votes for Ransom, and they vote for the newspaper man, and Liberty Valance is hung out to dry. He gets very, very angry, but he recognizes that he's kind of overmatched in this moment, and so he goes ahead and cuts out. But this is also where we get him calling out Liberty Valance, because one of the things that happened was he calls out Ransom, because one of the things that happened also is that the newspaper guy has his paper where a family was killed by the Valance gang, and so he recognizes that these guys are a threat to him, and he goes ahead and makes his call out to Jimmy Stewart's character as well.
Right. Yeah. And that whole scene is just this, you see this kind of like gentleman off a little bit with the two guys. So like this whole movie, I mean, we've kind of hinted at it, but the whole movie could be seen as this like baton passing between these two guys. So like this John Wayne character and the Jimmy Stewart character. But this is a real time, again, after this direct confrontation, and both of them have kind of shown, okay, well, we're turning into different people. But yeah, by the end of this, Jimmy Stewart has asserted himself as the guy who, in some ways, in a legal way, has defeated Liberty Valance. Right. And so in the next scene, you get again the monologuing journalist with the whiskey jug, excited about this new headline that he just wrote. Liberty Valance defeated. That's the big, oh man, like that feels so good to write that down. And technically, in a certain sense, it's true. But that's not how it ends up being, at least just because this newspaper came out and just because he lost the vote doesn't mean he's gone, and gone as a threat. But yeah, so, and by the end of that scene, you've got, Liberty calls out Ransom and says, "I'll meet you in the middle of the town and be alone. I'll see you there." And so that again pushes into the next scene. I've said this before, but the script is so tight in this movie that there's no extra shot, there's no extra scene. Even the stuff that seems superfluous at the time, you realize, oh, that really mattered later. And so why I'm always talking about, oh, and this just like catapults us into the next thing. It is amazing how much thrust this movie has for a small scale drama that doesn't have a guy pulling out a gun every 5 minutes. But anyway, yeah, I'm rambling now.
Turns out that 3 hour and 30-minute comic book movies are quite a downgrade from
right. Absolutely, yeah. The special effects budget. This movie. The only thing it ever won an Oscar for, just random factoid, was costuming. And so I think it got nominated for a couple of other things, but it was the year that Lawrence of Arabia won. So David Lean got it that year. But man, oh man, this is a great one. I've interrupted you again.
No, it's fine. That's why you're here. So the newspaper man during this, we should say, is beaten basically to death. They think that they have, when they see that headline, Liberty Valance and the guys, and again, it should have been kind of obvious. There should have been some kind of security detail. Somebody like, this is a very convenient moment where nobody in town notices the three most dangerous guys heading to the most obvious target available. But they go into the newspaper office where the man is monologuing with his whiskey bottle. They see the headline. They go ahead and beat him, and the only reason he survives is that the henchmen think he's dead and say, "Hey, he's dead. You don't need to keep hitting him." They break all of the windows. I think they light a fire at some point.
They break the printing press
They break the
as
printing
well.
press. Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Right.
And so you're right. It's interesting. In some ways, Liberty Valance has been defeated by the forces of civilization, right? But it's insufficient. Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
he has lost stature in the eyes of the community. There's a little bit of sheen off the apple when it comes to Valance and his mystique, his air of invincibility, because they were able to stand up to him in some capacity, but there's still no escaping the confrontation. There's still no escaping the physical showdown between these forces. So he goes ahead and calls out Jimmy Stewart, who is very shaken from seeing everything that has transpired. Gets the gun. He's still wearing his apron from dishwashing.
Can I pause you for just a moment?
Absolutely.
The as he's laying down, the newspaper man, he's laying down on this little cot in his office, and Jimmy Stewart sees him laying down in this cot, beaten again within an inch of his life. And the newspaper man sits up and he says, "I sure told that Liberty Valance about the freedom of the press."
Yes. Yeah.
I told him.
Yep.
Right. The thing is broken. The printing press is broken. He's beaten within an inch of his life. All the papers he wrote are ripped up. There's no evidence at all. Literal freedom of the press. He's not able to print anything. But he even at that moment, I don't know if he, at some level, you're like, there is this ironic, and you're kind of supposed to wonder that, but he delivers it with utter conviction. I sure told that Liberty Valance about the freedom of the press, and the same kind of, that familiar tension between those two things. One real in some sense, but not actual, not tangible.
His words have inspired the community. He in certain ways has bested him in the court of public opinion, but that is not sufficient to secure his actual victory here.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So Jimmy Stewart, like I said, grabs the gun. He heads into the alley. He's in the shadow where Liberty Valance is standing in the light on the boardwalk. And as he approaches, Valance just immediately, before he can really get the gun out, can really aim at anything. Valance starts toying with him. He shoots him in one arm, and Jimmy Stewart drops the gun, and he's like, "Hey, dude, you've got another arm. Go for it, gunslinger." Taunting him the whole time. Jimmy Stewart's reaching down with his offhand and barely able to scoop it up. Gets shot again, and right before it looks like Valance is going to go ahead and get the final shot off, Jimmy Stewart, it appears, goes ahead and manages to shoot Valance dead in the street, to the shock of everyone. Valance stumbles kind of across the way, but immediately falls down. And there's a great scene where the get the doctor, and the doctor runs up and he's like, "Whiskey, quick!" And the brings the whiskey bottle to him and hands it to the doctor, and the doctor just drinks the whole bottle of whiskey, and then's like, "He's dead," and then walks away.
And that joke's been done in 10, 15 other movies and shows, but that is the like seminal moment of that great joke.
So he's shot him dead. Everyone is in shock. Jimmy Stewart heads back to, he's in shock. He can't control his motor skills. He doesn't quite know where he's going. He's kind of in the zombie state. He walks into the restaurant, the back room where he kind of lives, to put the gun down. And that's where Haley finds him, finds out what happens, is comforting him. And it's very clear that they're not quite kissing, but she's like, touching his head. They're comforting each other.
There's nuzzling going on.
We're approaching that moment. And Tom Donovan walks in on all this, seemingly, again, at the moment, hinting at the twist here. But he comes in to learn what has happened, or talk about what has happened, sees them in this embrace, and recognizes, oh, I've lost her. Like once she has sees him as the man who has protected the city. Once she sees him as a man who has stood up for himself, that completes all of the things that maybe he was lacking
Right.
previously, all of the things that Tom represented,
Mhm.
that she wanted in a man. And now Ransom has become the complete package, and he recognizes that he is no longer kind of in this competition, and heads out immediately to the saloon.
Right. And that's the exact moment at which she is clearly his now is
Right.
the same moment that the town is clearly his.
Yes.
This thing that John Wayne has been there longer at and has been a part of protecting and founding is now belongs to somebody else. And the woman that he loved and wanted to start a family with now belongs to somebody else. Yeah, it's this heartbreaking moment where at that point, yeah, the story makes sense at some level. It feels like a tragic thing, but wow, Jimmy Stewart has gone from this naive lawyer guy to tough guy who punches John Wayne, and then afterward becomes the leader of this meeting, confronts Liberty Valance, shoots him dead, and then of course he gets the girl. Right?
Right.
That's how the story goes.
Right. It makes perfect sense. So John Wayne, devastated, walks into the saloon. He just starts knocking back shot after shot. And this is when the Pompey comes in and he says, "No, of course he can drink." You know, and also the two henchmen are in there, and they're trying to gin up the crowd to go hang Ransom. Right? They want to create a posse. They want to lynch him because he has killed their boss. Obviously, no one in town is buying this, right? They're not interested at all. And when one of them finally is dumb enough to draw on John Wayne just grabs his gun, knocks the guy out, and tells the sheriff to drag this trash out into the street. The sheriff, of course, being the guy that he is, tells somebody else to do the job. But now he's very brave. He says, you tell those ranchers that I ran you out of town. If you ever come back, you're in huge trouble.
Yeah.
But they threw these guys out, and John Wayne's character gets too drunk. He eventually starts getting a little mean to people. He starts kind of throwing money around. He buys the bottle that he's drinking. Screams at the band to start playing. We should all be having fun. Why are you all acting like this? And then stumbles out to head back to his homestead.
Yep. Yeah, and before the saloon scene, and I want to get back to it, but before the saloon scene, he walks out of the restaurant. He stands in the alleyway where he stood before. We've seen him there before, and he lights a cigarette. It's this beautiful shot, again, all black and white, but this beautiful shot of him lighting a cigarette, taking a puff on it, and then just having a moment to breathe after, again, everything that he loved, everything that he built. At some level, he just did basically the last thing that he'll ever do, and he knows that that's the end of him. He's just passed off everything, and that's the moment. And you get that little breath, a literal breath, right? He breathes in the cigarette smoke, throws the cigarette, and then goes to the saloon, and then it's downward from there.
So he heads back to his home where, like you said, he was building this porch and this extra room for the woman he thought he was going to marry. Obviously, he's devastated and still quite drunk. And so he goes ahead and throws I believe it's the whiskey bottle into the room. It shatters. And then a fire starts from there. I'm trying to remember
It's a
exactly.
lamp.
It's a lamp.
He's holding a lamp. He turns it up
That's
and then
right.
takes the thing off, throws it up against the wall that's just been painted of this room he built for Hallie. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I believe Poppy ends up pulling him out of the house.
So he sits down. So
Right.
John Wayne just sits down, ready to die in this
Right.
house. Again, he knows. Again, we'll get to this later, but he knows he's done the last thing he'll ever do. He's just passed off everything. So that's the end of his life. And we find out later that it basically was. It was basically the last thing he ever did. And then Pompey has to carry him out, and then they have to let the horses go because the fire's spreading. Then the whole house. So it's not just that room that he built on. The whole house ends up getting torn away,
Right.
with the flames.
So I believe then they transition to the statehood convention, right?
Yep.
I don't think there's anything in between there.
Yeah.
So the state convention is where he's brought up along. He and the newspaper man are there as the delegates, and he's supposed to be the representative to Congress. They want him to become the representative of Congress. And the main selling point on why he should be the representative of Congress is he is the man who shot Liberty Valance, and this has already turned him into a folk hero throughout the territory. And so he's going to be, this very important politician, but he has this moment of panic. He kind of steps off into a side room before the vote can happen, and says, and Tom is there, and he says, I can't do this. How could you choose someone just because they shot a man, they murdered somebody? How can I be a leader just because I murdered someone? Again, not understanding still through all of this that is an important part of this process, right? Like that actually the ability to defend and kill was a critical thing, and still is in that moment. And this is where we get the twist, where Tom Donovan, still quite disheveled, says, oh, don't worry, you didn't kill anybody. And he reveals that he was the one who shot him out of nowhere. But of course, he could not take credit for this. He couldn't say, oh, no, Ransom didn't do it. I did it. I'm the man who, because it was outside of the duel. He was, in many ways, a dishonorable actor by shooting Liberty Valance basically, in the back, without him knowing. And so he saved the man who was bringing civilization in that moment. He also saved the man who was taking his girl. He created the scenario in which this man would take his place by being the one who shot him, but ultimately he is also absolving this man of the cost of assuming any of those roles, because he's the one that actually did the dirty work that paved the way for him to become ascended.
Right. Yeah. And so now, after Ransom knows this, that he's again at another inflection point. Do I let everybody know that the thing that I've become famous for, and this is also important, the gap between John Wayne almost burning his house down, the death of Liberty Valance, and this convention is weeks. They say something about, in the last few weeks, he's become known as the man who shot Liberty Valance. And so already in this time, he's got that reputation, and he knows that is the key. He has no reason to recant or no reason to say it out loud. But yeah, he's now at this inflection point. And what he does after that little scene between the two of them is walks right back in the convention hall where all these people are cheering his name. And then John Wayne exits. And that's the last time we see him, alive.
Well, and John Wayne gives this really important speech. He says, you taught her how to read and write.
Yeah.
Now give her something to read and write about, right? Yeah. Recognizing that, he is going to give her a better life ultimately, or at least for what John Wayne thinks will be a better life than John Wayne could have given her. And so it's important for you to go ahead and live in this legend, even if that's not the case.
Yeah.
And this kind of wraps up the flashback. They go back to the funeral. He's been recounting this whole story to the Shinbone Star reporter now, the current reporter. And the guy ends up tearing up this whole thing. He's been taking notes, listening to this whole story. He's got sheets of paper. It's a huge, exclusive, and he tears it up and throws it away. And, Jimmy Stewart's character is confused. Like, why would you do that? And the guy says, this is the West. If you have the legend, you print the legend. You don't ruin the legend for everyone. And the whole thing is kind of capped off after, they go through all of this funeral, because they're sitting on the train. And they're, the porter's coming by, and he's asking if there's anything they need, and Jimmy Stewart lets them know, something he needs. And he's like, of course, anything for the man that shot Liberty Valance, And so you can see he and his wife are disquieted by that. They're still having trouble living through that lie.
Right. And within that last scene, as they're leaving the funeral parlor or whatever it was, the funeral parlor, it's basically a back room with a, box plain coffin. And as they're leaving, Jimmy Stewart looks back at the coffin, and there's a cactus rose sitting on the casket. And within this short conversation between the two of them, he says, Allie, who put the cactus rose on Tom's coffin? And she says, I did. Right. So, it's this, and pulling back to the beginning, this is a moment where she goes and they see the house where Tom Donovan, this burned out house. We've seen this house before. We saw it burn down, and that's all we knew about it. But we didn't know that Tom did it. We didn't know that it happened years ago when all these other events did. So we've seen this blown out house burned down with a bunch of cactus blossoms around it, because that's what she wanted to see when she came to town. So he wanted to go straight to the grave. She went with the former marshal to this little, basically a little shrine almost to this guy who is in a symbolic way, this cactus rose, this guy who grew up, not a lot of moisture, the irrigation, and the irrigation hasn't come out to this town yet. But that's the beauty that was there. And yeah, we get that little callback at the end, the very visual moment. And then, yeah, that's when the guy comes up and says, yeah, anything for the, nothing's too good for the man who shot Liberty Valance. But both of them know the real story. And at some level they can't say, or they won't say, or that you're supposed to walk away from this movie with just this like sense of, oh, I've like in the same way that they've at some level been ungrateful, or is this ungrateful? Is this taking something that isn't yours? And you're supposed to walk away with those. You're supposed to walk away with all of those, because at some level, we, like I said, the town ran off with Ransom at the same time that the girl did. We ran off with Ransom, and so we've decided to put away all the inconvenient aspects of how society gets started, all the ugliness, all the violence, the things that aren't pretty and aren't nice. But yeah, so we're her. We are the girl who's gone off with this guy, and now by the end of this movie, we also know the story. And so at some level, there's you see, if there's any culpability in this girl, there's culpability in us. And so this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the people think of the John Wayne Westerns as being naive, or as being the kind of cutesy, oh, that's kind of heartwarming little simple stories. This is one of those. If that's true of any of his movies, it's not true of this one, in the sense that this one knows about ugliness, and it also knows about how things get painted up, and it's very familiar with the way people deny things, the way people justify stuff, the way people choose to forget things or choose to believe things. It's, like I said, very human. This is a very, very human story.
Yeah, John Wayne obviously did a lot of movies, and so over the breadth of his entire career, he did have more hokey westerns than, again, somebody than maybe say,
which I love. Yeah, right.
Yeah, which I enjoy those. And to be fair, Clint Eastwood did a bunch of movies with a chimp, so really. But John Wayne does, scattered in there have some of those grittier westerns. Some of those more grounded stories, the ones with the darker shades. So it's not just this, clown versus reality, dichotomy. There is more there. We've hit an hour, so we're going to go to the questions of the people here in a second. But before we do, maybe just a little bit of the connections of the current themes, or the themes to the current world. Obviously we're in a society which is very much a not just a ransom society, but almost a post-ransom society, right? The people who have brought the civilization, who have pulled all the John Waynes out of the world, and made them irrelevant. And we are so reliant on all of the modern things that come with the railroad, as they keep saying in the movie. The approach of the railroad is the approach of civilization for them. And, we are so used to those things, and we find ourselves constantly quoting, papers that people and these kind of things, and thinking that makes change. So in a weird way, we're almost on the other side of this, where kind of in some way law and order is breaking down, and people are having a difficulty struggling with the fact that the civilization isn't, it's not that the civilization is coming, it's that the civilization has already come, and now it's kind of leaving, and people don't know what to do in those moments in which all of that complex paper authority starts to break down, because they're so far removed from the John Wayne style of understanding the world.
Right. Yeah. And what this movie does, I think, is helps us recognize those people, so that we're not we're not surprised when we find those people in history, and we're also not surprised when we find those people in the world. And we also can look for them and be excited about the Tom Donovan style characters that come along. Because if we aren't, then we represent. So a lot of people, even on the right and on the left, will represent the same misunderstanding that Jimmy Stewart has at the beginning when he says, so Liberty Valance says, "Hey, what are you doing without a gun? Why are you out here without a gun? I'll teach you about Western justice," and he beats him. And then John Wayne says, "Hey, if you want to stand up to Liberty Valance, you're going to need a gun." And so Jimmy Stewart, taking that in, says, "You're telling me the same thing that Liberty Valance did. So you're just as bad as this guy." But this movie actually helps us throughout the thing see the fundamental difference and fundamental distinction between these two types of people. And so if we see Tom Donovan without context, or if we see Tom Donovan with our first half of the movie ransom brain, then we're not going to see anything other than a villain. And we won't be capable of seeing him as anything other than a villain. But if we see him as a realistic figure, as something that actually had to happen in order for us to be here, then we're not going to be necessarily like when men, and if we want men to, if I want to raise men, then I need to recognize that Tom Donovan is a legitimate male figure, right, and not something that is something you should be embarrassed about. Or Tom Donovan probably didn't sit still in school. Tom Donovan probably wasn't easy to deal with at the grocery store. It's like, okay, that there's some, and so like there's something here, that there's some maleness and there's some real masculinity that is there, that can be channeled in a way that is building, and not just in a way that is the Liberty Valance way. And so recognizing the two that there is a distinction between these two kinds of harsh, violent masculinity. And I say violent because that's what's happening in the movie. But those are two different things fundamentally. And one is building, and one is trying to preserve a way of life that's been built. And another is trying to preserve his own particular way of life that's out there, that doesn't want a town to show up, and is just basically in the like corporate interest side of this whole conflict. So that's something I think it does help with. At least we can recognize these people when they come along, and actually root for people. If again, I'm raising 3 boys, root for my boys to be not just won't not be upset or surprised when they start acting like John Wayne does in this movie.
And C.S. Lewis is so good at reminding us of this. He talks about Aslan. He's not a tame lion. Obviously, he's screaming, "Hey, it's Jesus Christ!" the whole time. He reminds us that that part of what makes the lion great is his capacity for violence. And he has that other quote about there are going to be dragons out there, so let young boys know that there's also knights that can slay them. The world will be violent. There will be terrible things, and so do not lie to young man about the need for righteous violence. Those things are not things you should forget. Jordan Peterson, of course, is somebody for a lot of people who talks about this in the modern day, talking about how it's important for men to be dangerous. They need to control it. They need to wield it in a particular way. But this is a theme that I think resonates with a lot of people, because it's critical in the modern world, where so many people have simply drawn this line of, dangerous bad, violent bad, as where a more nuanced understanding of the role that this masculine feature takes in maintaining and preserving society is critical, especially as civilization itself seems to be wearing away in certain areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and move to the questions of the people. But before we do, Wade, where should they be finding your hilarious show?
You can search on YouTube, Wade Show with Wade. I'm also on Twitter at Wade Stotts. But yeah, you can check me out on all those places. And I also do a weekly podcast. I just released an episode with Auron. We talked about all sorts of things, but it was back at NatCon when we got to sit down. And so that's a Canon Plus exclusive. So if you are interested in that, you can go to joincanonplus.com and promo code Wade99. You get a cheaper first month. So
yeah, Wade got me alone in his hotel room.
Yeah,
I was very uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just yelled questions about politics at you.
All right. So Creeper Weirdo here says, all right, Auron, since you're such an expert, should I get into James Stewart Westerns or John Wayne Westerns first? I'm trying to remember how many Westerns Jimmy Stewart was in. Jimmy Stewart obviously is in a lot of movies. He's actually in several of my favorite movies. Vertigo is one of my absolute favorite movies.
Rear Window.
Yeah, Rear Window,
Right.
obviously. And then, though I'm a Vertigo guy over a Rear Window guy.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
We'll do another episode on that.
There
You
we
come
go.
on
There
my
we go.
show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll do the Morgoth endeavor
Yeah.
thing where we skip over each other's channels doing different movies. But yeah, he's obviously in some amazing movies. But if you're a completionist, you'll have an easier time, I think, completing the John Stewart movies before the
Yeah.
John Wayne movies. But obviously,
Yeah.
John Wayne is a classic Western character for a reason. He's iconic. You have to watch some of
Yeah.
the most critical ones.
And Jimmy Stewart, if you want to do both, you can do just the Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne crossovers. So if you want to start with this one, if you want to go, and also The Shootist, he's in that one with him.
Mhm.
And I believe there are a couple of other ones. So might as well just watch them both and then see which one
There you
sparks
go.
your interest more.
Whatever it takes you. Yeah. Tiny Stupid Demon says, "Oh great, I come here for a reliable dose of civilizational doom, decline, and despair, and you guys are watching boomer westerns. Okay, I'll watch the movie." Sheesh. Yeah, I figure we take one day off from civilizational decline to talk about the actual introduction of civilization. I thought we'd skip that one. He also says, "Do not quote laws to those who carry swords. Plutarch, Life of Pompey." Possibly relevant, extremely relevant, and a lesson that unfortunately Jimmy Stewart has to learn several times over in this movie. This is actually just don't quote Laws to Men with Swords, the movie, actually.
Yeah. Well, what's great about the movie is that it dramatizes that, so you understand it at an instinctual level in a way that you may not, even if you just read that great quote.
Right.
There's a great moment in I think I heard Stanley Kubrick talk about the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he hated talking about it. He was really like embarrassed to talk about it. He said, when you dramatize this stuff, it works, but when you start talking about it, it seems lame. All the ideas seem lame. So hopefully this conversation didn't seem lame, but the story itself really does dramatize all those ideas in a way that just hits home, and so that your instincts at some level can be trained in a way that your intellect can't on its own.
Absolutely. Tom here says, "Not Caught You Live in Ages, one of my favorite films. Have you seen Hell or High Water? It's like a neo-Western." Yes, I did watch that, though it came out quite a while ago now. It's weird. You get old and you're like, oh yeah, a new movie from only 10 years ago. You're like, that new band Led Zeppelin. That's kind of
yeah.
But yes,
Back
I do
to
remember enjoying that
just a
movie.
couple of boomers here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Back to the previous chat.
Yeah,
Hell or High Water is excellent. That is an excellent movie.
Yeah. And then Creepy Weirdo says, "Wait, are you a pepper?" I don't know. He's a spicy
Prepper?
guy, I guess. Yeah, I think he's going.
Could it be okay? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, he is out in Moscow, so
Yeah, it's crazy up here.
Yeah, when they Waco you guys, you'll have all the water you need.
Oh yeah.
All right. All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this one up, guys. Thank you everybody for coming by. Always great talking to Wade. Like I said, make sure that you check out his channel, of course. And if it's your first time on my channel, make sure you go ahead and subscribe, click the bell, notifications, all that great stuff, so that you can know when I go live with these discussions. If you'd like to go ahead and get these broadcasts as podcasts, you can do that by subscribing to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you'd like to pick up my book, The Total State, you can do that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or your favorite local bookstore. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.